to make sure everybody gets in. We'll just give you a couple of plugs here for the Artist Network. This is the Artist Network special event tonight to celebrate International Women's Day alongside our very exciting show. If you haven't been down to see the show at the Leslie Grove Gallery, I highly recommend you try and get down there, or at least look at it online. We have a beautiful and outstanding collection of work for this show. Really represents people all across Canada and maybe even a few from the US. So it's really a wide representation and diverse collection of very high quality statement art. Just a note about our upcoming show. We have a call out to artists right now for our April show about the environment. It's called Our World, the Wonder and the Worry. So have a look at that, call for submission online. We're expecting a very interesting collection of work for that as well. So please apply to that. Also, we're in the last few days of applications for our Riverdale Art Walk, which runs in June. And if you haven't put in your submission, we'd love to see you come out. The show is almost full, but we do have some spaces left. And we'll be happy to take a look at those applications next week. I believe they're due March 21st, actually, the week after next. So thank you very much for your support of the Artist Network and for joining us this evening. We're going to be having a very exciting talk here by our guest speaker, Joanne Poluch. Joanne joins us from sunny Florida. She's in Naples, and with the power of Zoom and technology, we have her right with us here at the Artist Network, wherever you are. So thank you, Joanne, so much for joining us. And Joanne actually was the guest juror of the show, and she'll be speaking about the content of this fantastic show and her talk, which she titles Against the Odds. And she'll be discussing 4 female artists, but I don't want to take away any of Joanne's thunder. I do want to give you some background on Joanne. We're so excited to have you. Joanne is an established art consultant. She originates from Guelph, Ontario, where she holds her BA in art history from the University of Guelph. And she also has a diploma in art marketing from Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York. She actually established her consulting business over 10 years ago in 2010. And she really is a multifaceted art pro, doing everything from jurying and mentoring. She's an educator and, of course, a consultant. She works with private and corporate clients, and she really coaches and mentors artists at all levels of their careers. In addition, she is a facilitator of Take 6, What Every Artist Needs to Know, which is a workshop. Joanne actually manages as well the art sales and rental program at the Art Gallery of Guelph, and she curates and juries work from approximately 170 artists across Southern Ontario. She's also been a very active juror for Art in Canada and juries art weekly from artists across the country. Joanne also, the list goes on, but we'll end it here. But she also hosts, I have to tell you, a television program on Rogers called On the Art Trail with Joanne, which is a weekly half-an-hour program. And she really has some fantastic guests, and highly recommend you take in that as well. But overall, I have met Joanne this year and worked with her in a few different projects. And I just can't say enough great things about her. She is really kind and smart, which is the best kind of woman, and the great combination of people skills to go along with all that art smarts behind her. So welcome, Joanne, and thank you so much for hosting our talk this evening.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I didn't know I was that busy, but I'll bet you there's a lot of people on this call that are that busy. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you to Laura Abbott. Thank you to the team. Thank you to Barb. Thank you to all of you that worked so hard to put this exhibition together. I'm so sorry that I could not be there for the opening, but I will be making my way home next month. But my apologies for not being there. I would have loved to have been there. So happy International Women's Day, everyone. And it, of course, is a day to truly celebrate in so many ways. And I just did a quick little bit of research to understand what exactly this day stood for and how it came about. And in fact, this day was started in 1909 by a group of garment female workers in New York who were terribly underpaid and working conditions were extremely poor. And they protested. And that kind of was the very early beginnings of International Women's Day. It then spread into Europe first, and to some of the more, I would say, liberal countries in Europe, Switzerland and Austria and Scandinavia. And then eventually it made its way to our shores, but not until 1975. So that seems like an awful long time for us not to have celebrated the many accomplishments of women around the world, not only their the economic accomplishments, but also the social and political extensive accomplishments of people, women around the world. This is the symbol. Apparently, I looked it up, and this symbol stands for unbiased bias. And I saw an awful lot of that today on my feed. And there's been an enormous amount of recognition today around the world. And I can't help but pause for a moment and give a lot of thought and prayer to the women of the Ukraine, those poor women who are brave and trying to survive, and men for that matter. But it's always those haunting images of women that we now see that are trying to get to safety with their children. So I know that for all of us, we're sharing that that burden as we watch it. It's particularly hit close to home for me because my husband is of Ukrainian descent and his parents were from the Ukraine. Oh, I forgot to say thank you to my ever supportive, beautiful daughter, Tatiana, who is quietly behind the scenes, but is ever supportive of me. And like most young women, she is carrying the torch forward with her generation. She's 27. She's carrying the torch forward and recognizing how important this day is to women around the world. Before we dive into the talk, I did want to talk briefly about my experience in jurying the exhibition. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was very surprised at the high caliber of artwork that was submitted. And there was a vast variety of work. I didn't know what to expect. And we had I don't know whether we can say how many submissions there were, but there were a significant amount, let's put it that way. And I really had my work cut out for me. And when anybody juries an exhibition, you know how difficult choices are that have to be made. One thing I will say to all of you that perhaps are listening in on the call tonight that are artists, is that I read thoroughly every artist statement that was put forward to me. And from my point of view, artist statements are incredibly important because they allow me to get inside an artist's head to try and understand where they're coming from before I view the work. So the majority of artists did a great job with that. And I was very appreciative that happened. So kudos to all of you. And as I mentioned in my artist statement, to those of you that didn't make the cut, take heart. It perhaps isn't because your work wasn't great. It was that hopefully you learn this, you take this as a learning experience and go forward and try and continue to grow and develop in your work so that you do reach the point where you're able to make the cut into a great show like this one. I did not intentionally set out to concentrate on figurative work, but that's the way it turned out. And as I looked at the overall submissions, and when I saw the show being hung, I was quite pleased to see the theme that emerged from it. Maybe it's my own subconscious. I am a very strong feminist, I guess you could say. And maybe that was some of my underlying feelings behind making my decisions. But nonetheless, congratulations to everyone. As I did mention to Laura Abbott, the coordinator, that I would have been happy to have talked to people that did not secure an entry into the show. And in fact, I did hear from a couple of people that wanted my feedback. I'm always happy to do that to any artist that needs some coaching and advice. So I'm still happy to do that if there are some artists that were wondering why perhaps they didn't make the cut. So the talk tonight is, it's going to be of a helicopter flyby, unfortunately. The four artists that I have chosen are extremely interesting, and I know that probably most people on the talk will know a little bit about each of them, but perhaps not a lot about all of them. And they have been tremendously influential in changing the dynamic on the Canadian art scene. And I loved doing research. As I was doing my research for this talk, I couldn't stop. And in fact, I was still doing research today and learning more about the artists. They did struggle against the odds, every single one of them. And so there is tons of material available for you that want to dig into these artists and learn more. They are, of course, there's plenty of material around to support their art journeys and how fascinating it was. So here we go. I'm going to get started, and I hope you enjoy the ride on the quick helicopter. So here we go. And where's play? Play. Phew. Okay, good. So
I want to share your screen first.
Pardon?
Just share your screen first so that we can see the presentation. Just hit the share screen at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
It's gone, Taddy. I'm on my own presentation now.
Oh, did you share screen?
You can't see your presentation.
We don't see it.
So
hang on, you may have to give her permission.
Can I hit escape?
You should be allowed to share the screen. We've got the permission set so you can.
Yeah, but I'm on the presentation now myself.
You can hit escape and then go back to the Zoom.
Can I go to play?
No.
No. Okay. So what am I doing?
So you're going back to the Zoom call.
Okay.
And then hit share screen.
Yeah. And then what?
Do you want me to just do it from my computer?
Sure.
Can everyone see the screen? Okay.
Yes.
So you're just tell me when you want to switch slides, Mom.
Okay, so I am on slide 1, right?
Yep.
Okay, so first of all, this is an image by an artist. Her name is Jasmine Saski, and Jasmine is from Vancouver. And I worked with Jasmine extensively to help her over her journey. But I love this image. She is a woman who is very vested in women's issues and sisterhood. across women in Latin America. And I specifically chose this image because I loved this image. The woman who can create her own job is a woman who will win fame and fortune. So thank you, Jasmine, for sharing that image with me. Okay, next, Tatiana. You good?
Yep, the next slide is up.
I don't see it. Okay. So here we are celebrating this special day. And the four artists that I have chosen are Maud Lewis, Hortense Gordon, Emily Carr, and Kenojuak Ashevak. So again, let me just reiterate, it is my sincere pleasure to be here this evening with you to celebrate this really important day. And it has truly been a daunting task to decide what Canadian great artists to feature, as there have been way too many to choose from, especially in this great country of ours where we have produced some incredible female artists. There are legions of female artists, and most of them are unsung heroes, I must say. And a lot of women have had their talents unrecognized and unrewarded. Sad to say, but that's the truth. And collectively, women artists have made untold contributions, particularly to the visual arts. And I'm proud to say that continues to this day, not just about the women that we're going to talk about tonight, but the women that have gone before us, your grandparents, your grandmother, your mother, and all the forebears, who many of whom were very talented artists and just never had the opportunity to be paid according to their efforts or to be rewarded for their efforts. Many times it was truly a labor of love, I would say. And this hour is going to tick by rather quickly, but I wanted you to appreciate that most women have made extreme sacrifices in their choice as being an artist, whether it's professional or otherwise. They have faced searing rejection. And these women, as you will hear tonight, 4 women in particular, have made extraordinary sacrifices and have endured untold suffering in their own lives in order to practice what they believed in, and that was their art. Okay. You know, I've kind of talked about this. So again, I wanted to talk about the fact that the first wave of feminism in the 1960s enabled us to make such a gigantic leap and strides in feminism. However, there's still a lot of unfinished business in the world of feminist and equality and gender equality and all of those things. So we still have, I hate to say, a long way to go. We do have a way to go, unfortunately. So the commonalities with all of these women, as I began to do research, was that they all faced restrictions living and working in a male-dominated world of commerce. And, you know, these people primarily were from the late 1800s and were into the 1900s and up until, in the case of Kenojuak Ashevak, into the late 70s and 80s. So all of these women were living under the male domination, shall we say, whether it was their fathers, their husbands, some type of patriarchal system where they were not able to enjoy their independence, other than Emily Carr. And even Emily Carr certainly had her own issues to deal with in the art world. Most of them did not achieve recognition with their work until either after their death or very late in their lifetime. Sad to say, but that is the commonalities with these people. They were not able to support themselves in their lifetime through their artwork alone. And most of them had to find other means of support, whether it was teaching art classes, whether it was teaching school, whether it was doing simple things like selling art cards, making pottery, weaving, some of the things that were very traditional in the role of women's lives. Nonetheless, none of the women that I'm going to talk about tonight were able to support themselves through their artwork alone, and either by choice or by circumstance, all lived in poverty for the most part. However, they were all determined to lead their own lives in the way that they chose, and their art was a vehicle for wellness and happiness for them. So let's start with Maud Lewis. And of course, Maud is iconic in Canadian history. And she has such a distinctive style and bold color that I know many of you have seen some images of Maud's work. And so she was born in 1903 and she lived until 1970. And she lived in an extremely small rural community in Marshalltown, Nova Scotia. If you look on a map with Marshalltown, you will see it's about an hour's drive from Yarmouth. So very tiny rural community. And in fact, Maud never ventured beyond 1 hour away from her home of Marshalltown in her entire life. That's hard for us to imagine these days when we can jump on a plane, when we can do whatever we like. But Maud's world was only 1 hour in circumference from the place where she actually was born. Rather astounding. And here is Maud in 1965. So she is known as Canada's Grandma Moses of art. And as I said, she grew up in rural Nova Scotia. Her father was a blacksmith and her mother was a homemaker, but her mother did encourage Maud to paint. So when you look at a lot of Maud's images, you will see some things that were probably influenced in her childhood from her father being a blacksmith. Images like this, carriages, horses, barns, that kind of thing, that will be from probably Maud's upbringing as a child. So Maud was small and frail all her life, and she would have been diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. She was not diagnosed with that in her lifetime, but a series of birth defects had left her fingers painfully deformed, and her chin was pressed to her chest. And her, of course, as a small child, she was very tiny, and children made fun of her. They mocked her at school because, of course, she was different. And so she left school in 5th grade at the age of 14. So that's hard to imagine. She was 14 years of age when she was in 5th grade. Nonetheless, her ill health caused her to miss a lot of school, and she left school with a grade 5 education. So during the early time in the 1900s and in 1910, for example, many of the homes in Canada, probably, but certainly in Maud's town, they would receive annual calendars every year from Currier and Ives. And for some of you that are familiar with that, you will know what I'm talking about. Those calendars were very prominent in homes, and Maud would have been able to see those images on calendars, and she was very influenced by those images that she saw. So she began to paint and sell cards, Christmas cards and other small cards to her neighbors and friends. She sold them for 25 cents a piece. And that is how she got started. This is how she signed her paintings all her life, M. Lewis. So she started out with a pretty humble beginning. Nonetheless, in 1928, she was in love with a man from her community, and she got pregnant, and she gave birth to a daughter, Catherine. Unfortunately, the man that she loved, or the love of her life, abandoned her when she was pregnant, and Maud was left on her own to go through the birth. So she gave birth to a young daughter. Her name was Catherine. And I just wanted to change this today as I was doing a little bit more research. In the movie Maudie, and most of you will have seen the movie, I'm going to talk about it in a second. But in the movie, it says that Maud was told that her baby had died in childbirth. And of course, that was not true, because her daughter did exist, and her daughter was adopted into a loving family. And she did go on to have 4 children in her lifetime, but Maud refused to have any contact or have any recognition with her daughter at all. So that was unfortunate for both of them, actually. But so when her parents died, typical of many women of the day, she had no way of supporting herself. She did have a brother, but the brother inherited the family home, and Maud was left without any financial support. So she hired herself out as a housekeeper to a much older fish peddler in the community, and his name was Everett Lewis. And Everett also lived in the tiny community of Marshalltown. So the deal was that she could move in with him and be his housekeeper, but she had to marry him. And so his cabin that he was offering her as a bride had no running electricity, no running water, and her health really didn't allow her to handle even the most routine household chores. She was quite crippled. Her hands were quite deformed, and I'm sure it was very painful for her to do the simplest of tasks. Nonetheless, Everett did take her in, and they did get married, and she started to paint. And Everett actually bought her first set of oil paints, and she would go to the local hardware store and buy paint or marine paint, and she began to paint on cardboard, on masonite, on whatever she could get her hands on, and she painted primarily images that she was familiar with. And what happened was, this is the tiny cabin. It is not a replica. This is a tiny cabin, the tiny cabin of where Maud lived her whole life. So this cabin is at the Art Gallery of Halifax, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia in Halifax. And for those of you that have seen it, you will know exactly how tiny it really is. But Maud went bananas with her paintbrush, and she painted every surface of that house. She painted walls. She painted the back of the stovetop. She painted toasters. She painted every possible thing that she could get her hands on. And all of her images were bright, colorful, joyful, happy, and it's really something, if you have a chance to see it, and I hope you do, that you have a chance to see it in real. It's really quite something. Oh, I just got stuck here. Is my daughter still on?
Yeah, you're on to cats and dogs.
10. Okay. Okay, sorry, I got okay. So yes, she painted cats and dogs, which is she loved her animals. And what she did was she painted the background, the surface of her canvas or her background with white paint. She drew very carefully an outline of the image she was going to draw, and then she squeezed paint right out of the tube onto her brush. She never learned how to mix paint or experiment. She just strictly put the paint right out of the tube onto her brush, and she painted. So it is very primitive. It's of course very charming and very endearing. And who doesn't love to see a wonderful image like that? Tatiana, my screen isn't moving now.
So can you see the Zoom call still? Are you in the Zoom call?
Yes.
So I'm just advancing them as you're talking. So
I was on number 12.
Yeah. So now you're on the greetings image, the horse-drawn carrot, or the horse pulling the.
I can't see that.
This way. It's
I'm still stuck on 12.
You should be in the Zoom call as opposed to your own presentation.
I am on the Zoom call.
Not quite sure, unless you just want to speak freely and send the PowerPoint after.
Well, so you can't bring up the images?
They're up on the Zoom call. I believe everyone else can see them right now.
But I can't.
Yeah, we can see them just fine.
But I can't, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Do you have your printed off notes? Just I'm advancing the slides, so just stick to your speaking notes, and I know where you are in the presentation, so I'm just advancing it.
Okay, so that's going to be cumbersome. So here's the thing. Okay, cats and dogs. Okay, so I'm going to be working now from my hard copy. Thank God I have hard copy. Sorry, guys. Maud, of course, remembered these images from the Courier and Ives calendar, and the images showcased her artwork of horse-drawn carriages, oxen team, and the other outdoor scenes of Nova Scotia. So here we see that she's painted a horse and sleigh going through the woods in a very primitive forest, and this was done in 1945. It was oil on paper, on cardboard, and it's quite charming, to say the least. Over time, she began to paint on small canvases and sell her paintings outside her front door to tourists and other American travelers. So her paintings sold for $5. And if you watch the movie, and the movie is called Maudie, and it stars Sally Hawkins and Ethan Allen. It's an extremely well done movie, and it is pretty close to her real life story. She did prop her very small paintings. She only painted mostly 8 by 10 inches because her arms would not allow her to paint any bigger than that. So she did prop the tiny paintings outside of her home, and as tourists would pass by, she would sell them for $5 a piece. And eventually her husband began to help her with her paintings to bring some meager financial success. But what's interesting is, of course, Everett didn't have any more education than Maud did. And so Everett hid the proceeds from her artwork in their backyard in mason jars and under floorboards in their tiny cabin. But she began to respond to market demands like all artists eventually learn how to do. And if her paintings did not sell, she painted over them and made new ones. So she was savvy in that regard, that she knew about the market. She understood about the market and what sold and what didn't sell. And even though her paintings sold during her lifetime for a very small amount of money, she still wanted to paint to sell and make a little bit of money. So she only signed her name Maud Lewis, and her work was rarely titled or dated. And in the last few years of her life, interestingly enough, visitors crowded into her tiny cabinet to buy a painting or two. This is interesting. Right towards the very end of her life, a small gallery close to Marshalltown named the 10 Mile House began to represent her, but she resisted prints because she was afraid of losing business. How charming is that? But in any event, there have been some Maud Lewis paintings that have been found in thrift stores over time. There was one found in Ontario not too long ago. There's lots of fraudulent work with Maud's work because, of course, you can imagine it's easily forged. But nonetheless, her work does show up at auction now. And her work, when I last looked at some of her pieces at auction, I think one of her pieces sold for $54,000. So Maud unfortunately did not live to see any of that success. And in fact, her husband, Everett, was murdered in his home in 1979 on New Year's Day. So a very sad ending to the story. Maud died of tuberculosis. But what is interesting is Maud's daughter, Catherine, did go on to have 4 children. And in 2018, Maud's descendants, her grandchildren, were invited to an exhibition at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, where they were able to view their grandmother's work. And I can imagine that would have been quite a moving moment for all of them. So the takeaway from Maud is that she never exhibited during her lifetime. After her death, the National Gallery began to take an interest in the primitive aspect of her work, folk art, actually, in Nova Scotia. And she became recognized primarily after her death. But her entire home, as you've seen, can we call it a home? Her cabin was painted from top to bottom. And I'm so happy that the Canadian government decided to keep this cabin for all Canadians to view, because she is really one of our great Canadian icons. In fact, she is the best known, one of the best known, I would say, artists in Canada. The movie Maudie, if you haven't seen it, I hope you get a chance to watch it. I know many of you probably have, but that movie was very well received, true to life. And by 2019, she had a solo show at the McMichael Gallery in Kleinburg, which opened to great acclaim. And Maudie has been loved forever since in Canada. So that's Maud Lewis. And if she doesn't charm you, I don't know what would as an artist. She's just an incredible woman who found such solace under such extreme hardship in her life. Hortense Gordon, we're moving on to Hortense Gordon. So this may not be a name that you might recognize, but Hortense Gordon was born in 1881 and she died in 1961 in Hamilton, Ontario. And Hortense started out she always painted, of course, as a child, like many female artists do. And she started out teaching art to local high schools. And her medium that she started to paint on was China. And this proved to be quite profitable for her. And when she was 22 years of age, she was approached to teach the Hamilton Art School. So for those of you that have connections to Hamilton, you can know that Hortense Gordon was a leading figure, certainly in the city of Hamilton, but she went much beyond that. As a young woman, before she got married, she was able to travel to places like Detroit and New York to see some very early beginnings of abstracted artwork from artists that were just beginning to think about abstraction. So she was quite attracted to this, but this is not what was happening on the Canadian art scene. And so she got married when she was in 1920, and she traveled to Europe, where she and her husband were inspired by the Barbizon School and other European masters, primarily the Impressionists. Her husband was an artist, and he was dead set against the avant-garde movement that was happening in Europe at the time. Hortense was the reverse. The abstracted art movement that Hortense was beginning to see excited her greatly, and she wanted to know more. So she raised a family of 2 children, all the while teaching art classes, teaching at in Hamilton at the Hamilton Art School. And she taught for many, many years. And she dedicated herself to students during the Depression and helping them find employment. These were art students during the Depression that would have had no way of finding work opportunities. And she dedicated herself to trying to find employment for them. So she was primarily a landscape painter, a pretty conventional landscape painter. And that's what was going on in Canada at the time. So when we think of the group of 7 who were very famous in Canada at the time, it was pretty much straight up conventional landscape painting. And in fact, it was quite conservative. And in Toronto and a little bit in Montreal, but more so in Toronto, there was nothing in the way of abstracted painting going on at all. So she fell under the spell of the Impressionists, first of all. And she moved back to Hamilton, where she started to teach a ceramics course. And for 40 years, she made her living this way until the death of her husband. And after the death of her husband, I assume she felt free to pursue the direction that she wanted to go. So the literature says that she became quite uninhibited and wanted to adventure into a style that she really was attracted to. So at the age of 59, she traveled to the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan. It was in Bloomfield, Michigan. And she studied for 4 years under a very famous abstractionist painter. His name was Hans Hofmann. And Hans Hofmann is accredited with starting the abstract expressionist movement in the United States. He was friendly with Jackson Pollock and some of the other abstractionist painters. And Hortense was one of the first Canadians, not only the first female, but the first Canadian to be accepted into that school, along with a colleague of hers named Alexandra Hunter. And the 2 of them studied under Hans Hofmann, and Hans Hofmann left a huge impression on those women to explore their desire to paint out of the mainstream that was happening in Canada. So this school was in fact the leading American grad school for art and architecture in the entire USA. And Hans Hofmann's style was recognized as a breakthrough in conventional art styles, and he became known as one of the most influential art teachers in the 20th century. And Hofmann was, his style was imbued with a spiritual aspect, which was quite different from what was going on in Canada in the day. There was a push and pull into the art, which many, of course, abstracted expressionists will understand. The use of contrast, the use of elevating flatness onto the canvas. And Hortense was quite keen to explore that and to take that into her painting practice. Hofmann also taught Lee Krasner, Helen Frankenthaler, and Louise Nevelson. So all of these women, of course, in the United States, became heavily influenced by Hofmann and went on to push the abstracted impressionist movement in the United States and Canada. And we all now are very familiar with all of those icons in the United States, Frankenthaler and Lee Krasner and Louise Nevelson. But it was Hortense Gordon and her sidekick who were the first Canadian artists to bring abstractionism back to Canada and see how it was going to go. And this was really a great time in their lives. Hortense, by this point, was a widow and was quite keen to have her name, make a name for herself in the Canadian art movement. So this was big time stuff. And in 1952, when Hortense was 71 years of age, she became the founding member of the Painters 11 in Canada. So the Painters 11, for those of you that may not know or have studied the Painters 11, there were 11 of them, only 2 of whom were women. And they became known as the Wild Ones in Canadian art because their art was so dramatically different from anything that was going on in Canada at the time. You can imagine that their work was not well received. Their first exhibition was in 1954 at the Roberts Gallery in Toronto, and it was met with disgust and disinterest. And people just could not wrap their head around it in any way, shape, or form. They didn't understand it. They didn't like it. And it was not well received by the, certainly by the Ontario public and just not understood at all. But that did not stop Hortense Gordon. And she continued to be, to pave the way for many female artists that followed her in Canada with her abstractionist style. And so she was elected to the Royal Academy of Arts, which is a pretty big deal in Canada. Some of you will know that from 1953 to 1960, these the Painters 11 comprised many important Canadian abstractionist painters that we know today: Jack Bush, William Ronald, and Harold Town. Typical of movements in Canadian art, it is always met with disdain or lack of interest or lack of recognition. But Gordon had a very strong and aggressive personality. And if you can see her picture, I don't know whether Tatiana was able to put her picture up, but she's a pretty tough broad. She looks like you don't want to mess with her. She was not well liked because she was so outspoken and so ambitious. But interestingly enough, she was respected and she was feared by her students. And in 1952, Lauren P. Harris, son of the Group of Seven painter Lauren Harris, arranged for Gordon to have a solo show at Mount A in New Brunswick. It's interesting that a group of seven, the son of one of Canada's most famous, a group of seven members, was able to recognize Hortense for her work and purchase one of her paintings and give her a solo, arrange to have a solo exhibition of her work. She died at 74 years of age, and she did have a retrospective at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. And upon her death, a retrospective was transformed into a memorial exhibition that opened in March of 1963. So again, another woman who, feisty, unstoppable, was going to live her own dream, was going to march to her own drummer, didn't really care what other people thought about her. She was just going to do it her way, a powerful figure who ended up being huge. And for those of you that are abstract painters in Canada right now with your own practice, you should go back and take a look at Hortense Gordon to understand exactly what she was saying in her work. She was influenced by the Cubists and by other people to begin to put her own genre together, which has now, of course, become extremely popular in Canada. Moving along to Emily Carr.
Sorry to interrupt. Before we go on to the next one, I just wanted to let you to be mindful of time. It's coming up to 8. I'm not sure how long you have okay for this.
I think we're good. I'm gonna move along.
Okay.
Emily Carr, 1871 to 1945. So Emily was born in Victoria, BC. And the image that you see that I've chosen is Emily on horseback with her beloved dogs. So Emily was the youngest of, second youngest in a large family of 9. She was raised in a strict middle class Anglican household in what was known as unpopulated Victoria at that time. Her upbringing she was filled with a deep love for the wilderness and the outdoors, and the mystery of the forest had always enchanted her as a child. So Victoria was in the boondocks, to say the least. Emily was extremely eccentric, and as you can see by the next picture, here she is. So she never married. She dressed in men's clothing. She smoked cigars. She swore, and she played cards, and she was considered by some to be really rude and quite obnoxious. When she was 19 years of age, after the death of her father, she traveled to San Francisco to attend the Mark Hopkins School of Art because she had family relatives there. Well, that would have been a big deal for a young woman to be allowed to travel to San Francisco, first of all, to go to art school. By 1898, at the age of 27, she took her first trip to sketch and paint Aboriginal villages along the coast of Vancouver Island to observe the Nootka peoples. The Nootka, as you will now know, used totem poles in their culture to provide oral history to their people. So, of course, this fascinated Emily Carr with the lifestyle of those people. Here's an image of her. She went to France. She went to England and France to study as a young woman, and her time in France marked her first departure from her traditional method of academic painting of the day. And she too naturally became enchanted with the Impressionist painters of the day. Of course, everybody became enchanted with the Impressionist painters of the day. Upon her return to Canada, she began to take extensive canoe trips. And these canoe trips were not nice. They were bug infested. And she traveled into the interior of Vancouver Island, where these canoe trips were completely off the grid. So no public services, no modern convenience. So she didn't take a train to get there. She portaged, she did it the hard way. And she really traveled under extremely harsh conditions to do research and to take sketches. She lived among the native people, and this was completely unheard of for a female artist to do this. In 1907, she went to Alaska with her sister, with her sketchbook in tow, and she visited Skagway, Juneau, and Sitka. And Emily Carr always sketched ideas in her. A sketchbook never left her hand. And in fact, all of her paintings were produced from her sketchbook. And when she was no longer able to travel, she did a lot of her paintings from her sketchbook towards the latter part of her life. The next slide shows some of my favorite Emily Carr paintings. In particular, the Totem Walk at Sitka is from Alaska. And bear in mind that there were no other artists that were doing this kind of work. So she was completely unconventional with her subject matter, with her painting style, with her thought process about how she was doing this. There was no other artist in Canada that was doing this at the time. But she couldn't support herself by her art. So she set up a boarding school for dogs. And here she is looking rather eccentric, I must say, with her 2 dogs on her shoulder. She looks pretty happy because she's doing her own thing, but she was not able to support herself through her artwork at all. So she raised chickens and rabbits to bring in a little bit of money to support herself. And often her home was littered with a menagerie filled with cages of birds and various animals. And as she was unmarried, this would have considered to be completely outrageous for a woman of the day. So it looks outrageous, and she was outrageous. And I don't think she really gave a damn about what anybody thought. She was doing her thing in her way. But as I mentioned, she couldn't support herself through her artwork. So she ended up turning to pottery. And some of the designs that she was making on pottery were of Aboriginal motifs. And her pottery, interestingly enough, sold reasonably well, not beyond Alberta, but in British Columbia and in Alberta, she did manage to sell her pottery pieces relatively well. So that's interesting. I've chosen her most famous painting, and I know that many of you will know this painting. It's called The Indian Church, and it is at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And as you can see, this painting is quite striking. I don't know what the value of this painting would be today, but it is a very well-recognized painting in Canada. And the work was purchased by Lawrence Harris, not the son, but the father, Lawrence Harris, who hung it in his dining room. So Lawrence Harris took a flyer on Emily Carr. He liked her work, he liked her style, he liked her philosophy. And so she was invited to show with the group of 7. She did not become a part of the group of 7, but she was able to show her work with the group of 7. And she became friends with the men who were a part of the group of 7. They accepted her and they allowed her into their world. And it was finally the director of the National Gallery began to take an interest in Canadian West Coast art and decided to give her some notice in Canada. And that's where she began to achieve some recognition, at least. It was only in 1927 that she had her very first exhibition, and her work during the time for the most of her life, her work was misunderstood and unappreciated by her viewers. After failing health, she took to writing and painting images from her sketchbook from 1937 to 45. And when her health turned poorly, she wrote a couple of books. And of course, by the time of her death, close to her death anyway, she won a Governor General's Literary Award for her work. So here's her tombstone. It says, artist and author, lover of nature. And Emily died of a heart attack in 1945, but she certainly was so instrumental in the Canadian art scene. Of course, now there's the Emily Carr College in Vancouver. Many of her holdings are found in the Art Gallery of Vancouver. They're stunning. If you've never had a chance to see them, I hope you do. They are you feel completely dwarfed with the magnitude of her work. The colors are phenomenal. How she managed to capture the essence of the mystery of the forest, which she held so dearly to herself throughout her lifetime. So she is noted for spearheading the first modern art movement in Indigenous art in Canada. Of course, she was never officially a member of the Group of Seven. She was one of the most original painters, interestingly enough, or she has been called that in the first half of the 20th century. She was the first female artist to paint and document Aboriginal people along Canada's West Coast. Nobody had thought about doing that or had done that ever. Emily Carr was the first. So she really reframed iconography that embraced the political, social, cultural, and ecological subjects in the late 19th and 20th centuries. So that's our Emily Carr. The last artist that I've chosen is Kenojuak Ashevak. So Kenojuak was born in 1927 and she died in 2013. She was born on Baffin Island. She was born in an igloo on the southern coast of Baffin Island. And she led a really nomadic family life. In the winter, she and her family lived in igloos, and in the summer, they lived in sealskin tents. Her father was a hunter and a fur trader, and he was also a respected shaman. And so shaman were and still are respected with the Inuit people. And so Kenojuak had a bird's eye view into exploring all of the things that her father so strongly believed in, and how this became so influential in her own work throughout her life. Her father was murdered when she was 6 years old, when he came into contact with Christian converts. Her mother taught traditional crafts, including repairing sealskins for trade for the Hudson's Bay Company. And Kenojuak was married off at the age of 19 to a local Inuit hunter. And she lived with that husband. And she, in 1950, she contracted TB and she was sent to Quebec against the wishes, against her wishes, but that's where she had to recover. And during her lifetime, she had 3 husbands. She bore 11 children and she adopted 5 other children. In 1958, at 31 years of age, she and her husband moved to Cape Dorset so their children could go to school. And while she was at Cape Dorset, she was discovered, and I use that word discovered in quotations, she was discovered by an administrator, James Houston of the Hudson's Bay Company, when he saw a drawing that Kenojuak had done on a sealskin bag, and it was of a rabbit about to eat seaweed. And here you can see an image of that. It's extremely, there's strong, bold lines. The colors are phenomenal. And this was one of the first paintings that were brought to the attention of James Houston of the Hudson's Bay Company. Houston encouraged her to draw and to use graphite colored pencils and felt tip pens to draw animals and birds of the area. That is what she knew. That is what she drew. And I read it. I remember reading a quote where she said that she of course never had any formal art training. She never used an eraser. She merely put down on paper what she knew from her imagination. So that's quite incredible when you think about that. No mistakes with Kenojuak. She put it down and that was that. And the colors are extremely beautiful. She obviously had a lot of confidence with what she was doing because she never backtracked. She just put it down and that was the way it was. In 1960, she did this enchanted owl, which everyone will be very, very familiar with. And so from 1960 onward, Kenojuak's work was included in every major annual print collection release of the Cape Dorset print collection. So that's quite astounding. That collectors from Southern Ontario, not just in Ontario, I would say in the South, as they call it, began to take great interest in not only in her work, but in the work of other artists from the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, which is renamed, but still is in existence today. And it is primarily out of Cape Dorset. And Kenojuak's work is still to this day highly collectible. There are limited runs of her work that are still circulating widely through collectors in Canada and the United States and for all over the world for that matter. But Kenojuak is important because she really encouraged other young artists to have the confidence to draw and market their work into the South, where they could earn a little bit of income to support themselves. So, you know, that's why she is so important as an icon in Canada. She created thousands of drawings, stone cut prints and other prints. And they, of course, became highly collectible, not only to private collectors, but museums around the world. And this, I thought this was interesting, and maybe some of you already know this, but in 2004, she created the first Inuit designed stained glass window for the John Bell Chapel at Appleby College in Oakville. And I hope some of you have had a chance to see it. It's quite beautiful and it's quite striking. And it is a famous image, certainly in Canada. Her work was always simple, based on bold lines and strong colors. And that told you that she was very, very confident with her work. And here you see just some examples of some of the many, many images that she did, some soapstone carvings. They're all quite beautiful. And many people, collectors in Canada, hold many of these in their honored print collections today. So the takeaway from Kenojuak was that she really was the leading figure in modern Inuit art. She paved the way for generations of Inuit artists from Canada's north. In 2008, she was awarded the Governor General Award for Visual and Media Arts. She received honorary degrees from Queen's University and the University of Toronto. Quite astounding. A young woman born in an igloo on Baffin Island would go on to receive honorary degrees from major universities in Canada. She traveled all over the world as an ambassador for Inuit art in Canada. Her enchanted owl was made into a postage stamp in 1970. And since her death in 2013, her work has fetched record auction prices, including $59,000 for the rabbit-eating seaweed. So that I told you it would be a helicopter tour, and it is. My last slide that I want to leave you with before we enter into a bit of a Q&A is that, you know, the empowered woman is powerful beyond measure and beautiful beyond description. And we all need to be empowered. We all need to seek support from each other and continue to be lifted up with our sisters around the world. And empowerment is everything. And I really do hope that you go on to persevere wherever you are in your art journey. I think it's critical that you understand 4 women like this battled the odds. Every single one of them did. They never gave up. They continued to have the courage and conviction to go forward with their dream. And at the end of the day, they were successful. So that's my message for tonight. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can get back to everybody.
Thank you so much, Joanne. That was, wow, that was fantastic. I'm almost speechless. There's so much to take in there.
I know. I'm sorry. It was a lot of information, but you know, each one of them, and the point being, especially tonight, the point being that, of course, nobody's life is easy as an artist, and it is, and we are fortunate. Most people on this call tonight are fortunate to have opportunities to buy supplies, to have success, to pay the rent, to not live in dire situations. And here are these 4 women who left incredible earmarks. And in fact, I guess the question that I would ask you is, if they were men, how would life have been different? So would they have been able, if they were men, you know, what kind of a journey would they have had? But instead, they battled it out in a man's world to a large extent.
That's the question for sure. If anyone in the audience, oh, there is a question actually from Diane. Diane, go ahead. Oh, just thanking you.
Joanne, I just want to thank you for this very powerful tribute to these amazing women. I'm Indigenous also, and I really appreciate all the sharing. I know as women, we go to roller coaster and we're so much underpaid, undervalued and everything. I really appreciate all what you have mentioned on them and how they conquer their obstacles. That's amazing. So I would say to you, Chimigwech.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Please just unmute yourself and you can discuss something with Joanne.
I mean, we could start by having people express their opinion about, you know, what would have happened if they were male.
It's a great question. Well, first of all, I think it should be the group of 8. If we're gonna, I've always wondered that, right? Like poor Emily Carr, they let her show with them, but they wouldn't call it the group of 8 or really recognize her de facto. So that's
Emily was such a wild card, you know. She didn't care really. And I guess that's the beauty of Emily's whole experience, was that she didn't care, and she was going to endure the most harsh conditions in order to find her source material. And it got more and more interesting as time went on.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I took out of it, sorry, is that, you know, as much as, you know, especially over the last couple of years, artists have been really struggling and frustrated with things that are going on. And yet, you know, you have to really look at the artists that came before us and what they went through to allow us even to be where we are here. And I think it helps me to kind of give my head a shake and kind of go, yeah, it's not that bad. And there's still improvements to make. And I think we still need to drive forward. But it's good to see that there is a path of things hopefully getting better.
Yeah, I definitely hope so too. Maybe some artists don't feel that way, and maybe some artists feel that they are stuck in the quagmire and unable to receive the recognition. And I always try and instill a positivity when I'm speaking with an artist and say, you know, being an artist is a lifelong journey. It's not a day, a week, a month, a year. It's a lifetime. And you know, hopefully you are finding immense joy in your art practice, and that really is what keeps you in the game. And if you have to wait until the latter part of your lifetime to achieve the success that you feel you deserve, maybe that's what has to happen. But you know, I guess the takeaway is that you don't give up when things get a little rough.
It's definitely the point you brought up. I'm trying to find some commonalities as well in threads, and really all those women showed such bravery and confidence and persistence, as you said, and really that's what you need to keep going. You know, at every stage we have different, like, first world problems here. You know, like, it's not like we're out on a canoe trip or we're living. You know, luckily Canada has wonderful support systems, but there's other types of emotional battles and things that we need bravery for, and confidence. And, you know, it's a different world now, but if we keep up that courage, we can maybe achieve great things too.
Well, think about poor Maud. I mean, incredibly difficult circumstances, pain, suffering, physical suffering, poverty, being married to a man that she really didn't love, having to abandon a daughter, and so many deep and powerful tragedies in her life. And yet, look, she painted butterflies and flowers and cats that she loved, and happy childhood things of, you know, horses being drawn through the snow. And I think that really is what it's all about at the end of the day, is finding your own joy. It's wonderful if you have people that appreciate and love your work and love you. That's fabulous. But really, and I've said this for a very long time, you probably should be looking for gratification from yourself. And if you have that, then chances are people will feel that too, but it has to come from you first.
Very good message. It's a great message for all of us. It comes here from the heart.
It does.
If your art comes from the heart, it shows.
When it comes from the heart, then everything else follows.
Mm-hmm. Is there any other questions or comments for Joanne? I mean, it was a very, you know, all-inclusive, exhaustive.
I'm sorry that I hope my daughter did a good job. I'm sure she did, trying to keep up with me.
She got you through.
And I'm sorry, I don't exactly know what the stumble was, but and thank God, just thank God, I had hard copy notes. At the last minute, I decided to do that, or it wouldn't have been a very interesting presentation.
Always good to have the backup material.
Yeah, but anyway, I don't know what the problem is, but hopefully people got some message to take away.
It was great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we're getting a lot of comments coming in already. Everyone's very happy, very important topic. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, Joanne. A lot of enjoyment, a lot to absorb here, and to look up some more material too, because these are fascinating women that really paved the way for all of us.
And you know what? I loved, I'm an art historian by training, by my education. And so I eat this stuff up. I mean, I just can't get enough of learning about incredible women and their accomplishments. It's just completely fascinating to me that people are able to accomplish so many incredible things in their lifetime. That includes all of us.
Right.
You know, most of us have long life ahead of us still. And hopefully we will leave our mark somehow, somewhere.
Sure.
Whether it's as grand as we want it to be remains to be seen.
Right. We have another comment that someone loved the comment that you said, we get rewards at different ages, and that can come at a later date, perhaps sometimes, and artists don't really have to conform to societal pressure, she's saying.
Well, that's the joy of being an artist, is that you don't have to conform to societal pressures, especially nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
You whether your art is appreciated or recognized is another matter, but you can march to your own drummer and do what you want to do. I think the difficulty, and I said this before, I think the difficulty is that we live in an instant world now where we want instant gratification, and we don't really stop to think about the long journey in the life of an artist. It's a lifetime. It's not just a year. It's not just through COVID. It's just a forever journey, which is ever changing and evolving depending on the people we meet, the influences we have, all of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of being an artist. You guys as visual artists are so lucky. You are able to express yourself to the world visually. And that's such a beautiful thing. I mean, I can't do that. I'm not an artist. And I think for people in your organization and for people that listened in tonight, you have to understand how important your role in society is. It just is. We need you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a very inspiring talk. Lots of comments coming in. What a great presentation it was. And these artists give us all great lessons for our journey. And as you said, we do have something to say as artists, all of us, and as mentors at both ends of the spectrum. And we have to continue to say it. Artists are being heard, and social media is certainly a help in that. But I like the comment about the long haul. We have to focus a little on the long haul too. Social media is so immediate, so daily, so hourly. On Instagram, it's nice to think that we have a longer journey to pay attention to, and the influences that can change in our life. And look what artists are doing now, as you said, for the Ukraine. Artists are having auctions and selling out, and making statements and donating money, and it's wonderful to have that voice.
That brings so much joy for me to see that with artists. I did a post the other day. I said, artists are the most giving. They're constantly supporting a cause, a crisis. They are the most generous people on the planet. They give so easily and so willingly. It astounds me that they are so generous in every way. They just are, and they're raising, great sums of money for this terrible situation going on right now, and out of the goodness of their heart.
It gives you hope. There's something you can do. There is something you can do, even in small ways. You can be heard. You can make a difference. And we have another comment coming in. A book by Seth Godin, and his book, The Practice, speaks very well to the work of artists, is one of the artists is saying. So we'll have to look into that and follow along this thread of what
I didn't exactly know how to approach my talk, and I would have loved to have shown more images, and we could have talked about it as a group. So I didn't really know how to structure it. And I know the comment about my daughter, it's 5 after 8, Mom, move it along. But nonetheless, there's a lot to talk about. And I wanted to really drive home the fact about the obstacles, and to have people walk away and say, I've got it not so bad after all. And I do hope that people take the time to do a little bit of research on some of them, maybe some things that I skimmed over and really didn't do a great job at articulating, because they're all fascinating, and even to take a closer look at their work. I mean, Emily Carr's work is massive, and Kenojuak's. I mean, it's astounding what is out there. So I do hope people take the time to step back and do a little bit of research on it and on them, and learn a little bit more about what they did.
Yeah, well, you've definitely given us food for thought to look in deeper. Great comment has come up. We had history, his story. Now it's time for her story, So that's a great comment. And someone wants to put this on public posters. We need artists because they are the most generous people on the planet. And many of us can creating art and not, just focus on paying the rent. So we really have to focus on what we want to say, what we want to get out there. But again, it's very inspiring words, so much food for thought, and wonderful to think about what these women have done to pave the way for us in, the next generation and this next century, really. So
and we get to talk about it today. We get to talk about it on a day when, millions and millions and millions of women all over the world are thinking about this day, and what it means to them, and what it means to other women in the world. It's a very important day, and I'm very pleased that you offered me the opportunity to speak today, because this day is very important for me too.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's our pleasure to host you, and we appreciate your work, all your preparation on the presentation. And I encourage everyone to have a look at the show as well that Joanne juried. There's some beautiful, meaningful work with, I think, almost 40 artists and what they have to say in today's world. There's some very strong statements and messages there to be had. And I'm hearing that the show really is amazing. It's a real must-see for us. And everyone needs to get out and see it. And Joanne, you've seen all the photos as well. So once again, thank you for jurying the show. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening at the Artists Network. And we appreciate sitting with us tonight and hearing this fascinating presentation. Of course, if you have any other questions or would like to know about the Artists Network and the other programs and seminars we offer, please do reach out to us in the contact section of our website. And we have lots of active volunteer members that work to make this a great, great network. And it's only as exciting and prosperous as all of its volunteer members. So thank you again, Joanne. Thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you all again soon at one of our next.
I just wanted to give my thanks as well, Lisa, to doing a great job of facilitating this as well. Obviously, Joanne, thank you so much for your time and for the team that hung it. But also, if there's any artists that are on this call, I would really encourage you to really promote this show. Like, it would be great to get as many people as possible to see it in real life. And that really helps all of us female artists to have more people looking at women's art. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, and Barb for hosting. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Hope to see you.
Yeah.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Good night, Joanne.